welcome back to the Fashion Lab. This is my first ever repeat guest, which means we're a success. Which means people don't have an awful experience. Supreme Models, the documentary turned 2, the book turned 5, so I had to get Marcellas back to tell us how's it been. So Marcellas, how are you?
I'm fantastic this morning. I'm so excited to be here. So excited to be talking to you for the second time. So excited to be the first guest to be asked back twice. I know that will happen again. I love being a trailblazer. I love being the first.
Of course.
Ooh. Veronica Webb, I was talking to Veronica yesterday. She said something and I it was so good that I had to write it down. She said, "It's a wonderful thing to be the first. It's a terrible thing to be the first, but you don't want to be the only." And that works really well with what you just said, because if I had been the only, then that would have meant the podcast sucked and there would have been one and done. So here we are.
And it's perfectly on theme for the conversation we're going to have about Supreme Models. And of course, anytime you want to put a quote from Veronica Webb, we're all happy. So 2 years later, what do you think is the biggest imprint the series has made?
Talking about the first, it was the first. And I really do believe that it opened the door for some other really beautiful premium documentaries. It opened the door for Beth Ann Hardison's Invisible Beauty, and it opened the door for Donielle Luna's Supermodel. I think it just set this standard, right? And people were ready to hear those specific stories, to hear stories about Black women and to hear stories about Black talent. You know, Beth Ann had been working on her documentary for years and years and years. And then all of a sudden, in the space of like 3 years, it's like, bam, my book comes out, bam, I sell it as a doc, bam, we're in production, bam, we're out. And I think that because it was Beth Ann and it was Iman, I think that inspired Beth Ann to go ahead and complete her documentary. And I actually think, because she's been working on her book for a really long time, I hope that the fact that I've done 3 books in 5 years inspires Beth Ann to finish her book finally. So, yeah, I think that was the biggest impact of Supreme Models. It was really seeing this new slate of documentaries about Black models and about Black beauty. Because I definitely think that Supreme Models was bigger than Black models. I think it was about colorism. I think it was about Black beauty. It was about how Black models changed the standard of beauty and combated this idea of what the European standard of beauty was, this blonde-haired, blue-eyed sort of, ideal that had been so long the norm. And I think Black women in general combat that, even in like Hollywood, even in music. So I think that.
And I was rewatching the series this week. And one thing that jumped out to me, I think because I know I was having this conversation, there were things that I noticed that I didn't sort of notice the first time round, which were you put a lot of those serious topics that you just mentioned, such as colorism, in episode 1. And I really liked that you just came straight out the gate with those topics on the table. Was that intentional?
Yes. For me, it was intentional.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I wrote Supreme Models, the documentary. I wrote the episodes. I wrote the guidepost, right? So it does sort of play out linearly. It plays out with the advent of Ebony magazine, which caused the need for Black models, because before Ebony magazine, there was no need for Black models because white people weren't putting Black people in advertising. And if they were putting them in stereotypically. They were maids, they were mammies, they were porters, they were slaves. They were caricatures of what we thought, it was the Black child eating watermelon. It was the pickaninny. It was like images like that were how white America depicted Black Americans, even though by then there was this idea of Black success. We had already had the Great Migration from the South in the United States. We already had the Harlem Renaissance. There were Black writers and Black doctors and Black politicians. There were Black deputies. There were Black people infiltrating beautifully and successfully every area of America except in film and except in advertising. So for me, knowing that history, right, knowing how vast and racist that history was, I thought we had to explore it right away. And I thought it was really important to explore it right away because even though Ebony Magazine was this sort of beacon for what Black life was, they suffered from colorism. So you opened Ebony Magazine and all you saw were light skinned models, light, bright, almost white is the term. So that talks about that sort of idea of Black people suffering from their own hate of their own color and their hair texture and blah blah blah. So I really thought it was important that we like got into it right away. If I had my way, Supreme Models would have been much more political. It would have been much more about the things that I think Black people suffer from at the hands of others.
Right.
It touched on them, I think, beautifully, and it touched on them poignantly, but it could have gone much deeper. And so when I rewatch it, and I rewatch it all the time, I rewatch it with a loving eye because it took me so long to write the book. And it took a very short time for the book to become the documentary.
Right.
But when I also rewatch it, I rewatch it with the critical eye because I didn't get to make as many decisions as I would like, even though I was one of the executive producers and I was the writer. And so when I wanted to put in things that were deep and that challenged the viewer, it was sort of watered down, or a lot of those things weren't addressed because we could have gone farther.
It's a shame, actually, because the next part of this question that I had, well, wasn't even really a question, but more just, I think that episode of Supreme Models is one of the best discussions I've seen about colorism in a kind of presented in like a video, be it TV, be it film, be it anything. Because I think sometimes when you see a group of Black women discuss colorism on television, I feel like especially the lighter skinned women tend to say these like cookie cutter responses because they don't want to be offensive and they kind of just say what they think they should be saying. But I think the models that you had on there were really personal, really eloquent. Everybody shared their experience, but in a way where it didn't feel like anybody's experience cancels out the others. It was just a really like honest, stunning, you heard everyone's point of view and you were like, you're all right. Like, no, this is all your lived experiences. But then it's still focused on the fact that the darker skinned models were the ones that were affected the most. And I just think it was so effortless. And it just is an example of the authenticity and effortlessness that comes when a show is actually made by Black people.
I love that because I love that there's this idea, you know, we're so programmed to hear when we talk about colorism, it is just the dark woman's point of view. But being American, light-skinned women of color suffer from colorism as well. You know, there's always that battle. I mean, I think it goes back to like Spike Lee's School Days, where there were the gamma rays versus I can't remember what the dark skinned girls with the natural hair called themselves, but the gamma rays were like the light skinned girls. Tisha Campbell had blue contacts in her eyes and she had dyed her hair blonde, and they all had relaxers and weaves. And, you know, I think that Veronica Webb so beautifully talks about colorism as it affected her. And when there's a moment in the doc, not to continue to talk about Veronica Webb, but there's a moment in the doc where she says, I think colorism is actually more hurtful than racism because it comes from your own people.
I was going to mention this quote because that was one moment where I almost was like, oh, like, did she actually just say that? But then I was like, no, she did. And then when she continued to speak and it got to her next bit of speaking, I was like, okay, it's fine. I'm so not used to seeing people on a documentary be that honest. And I was like, oh, because I think people would have shied away from saying that before because the headlines would be, Veronica Webb says her experience is worse, and take it completely out of context. But even that moment, I was like, oh, like they're really being honest here. And I can relate to what she was saying. So I was like, okay, actually, do you know what? Fair enough. But it still, went back to Karen Alexander and all the other people. I just think it was so well done the way you handled that topic.
We tried really hard, and um, and where colorism is concerned, personally, colorism is an ideally sort of Black thing, I think, and because I don't think that I don't think that white people who may be racist are separating out, well, she's light skinned, that's better. It's like all of y'all Black. You know what I mean? So you can have your varying, your cafe au lait, but unless you can really pass, you're still Black. It's that one drop of Black blood in the bucket makes you Black, is that saying in America. And so I thought that was incredibly important. And I thought that it was incredibly important. And it was very intentional that we hear the light model's point of view, as well as the dark model's point of view, because I think that brings us to where we are in 2024, moving into 2025, where colorism is concerned. It still exists. Here's my controversial thought of the day. I want to go back to this era of the late 80s, early 90s, where there were Black models that were personalities and you knew their names. You think about the models now, you don't know their names. There's an inexhaustible stream of new Black girls every show, every season, but you don't know their names. And we're not building their careers the way that we used to build their careers, which I think causes longevity and which I think makes a girl a star, right? So there's 100 of these, 1,000 of these like girls that all look the same. But where are the stars? In the late 80s or into the late 90s, there were Black girls that were stars. There was Tyra, there was Naomi, there was Karen, there was Veronica, there was Alec, there was Leah, there was Kirsty Bowser, there was all these one-name girls, where they all had two names. But we knew them so well, and they had such big personalities, and they were each so different and extraordinary in their own way, that we knew them by their first name. And there was a million individual girls. And that moment in time is why Beth Ann Hardison created the Black Girl Coalition. It was not created to talk about what was wrong with the industry. The Black Girl Coalition, in its original inception, was created to celebrate the success of the Black model breaking through in a way which they had never done before. And I want to get back to that day where we know Black girls' names in the same way we know Kendall and Gigi and Bella. Right? We don't know. There's very few Black girls that we know by that one name. We're not creating stars like that. These new girls are all the same and they're all disposable. There, I said it. I want Black stars again.
Do you think the industry is set up to create stars even at that level anymore without being like a Nepo baby? Because Kendall and Gigi is famous families, right? We have like Anok, we have Owen, we have Adut, who are probably the three breakout stars, like Black girls at the moment. Anok is definitely gunning to take Model of the Year this year. People were like outraged that she didn't win when Paloma won, which I think we spoke about that last time. Do you think you can have that kind of star anymore in modeling? Do you think the industry allows for it? And I also got a second thought just come out of what you said. Do you think also that maybe what we're seeing is, before we only had the stars, now we have stars, and on the next layer there are just like regular working models that are dark skinned and beautiful, whereas before it was like you're either a supermodel or you're out. There's 10 Black supermodels on a pyramid of 100 white models.
That is super interesting. Because I don't think, yes, the business has changed. And in order for a girl to become a star now, it's almost like she had to be the child of, right? She had to be Hailey Bieber. She had to be Gigi. She had to be Kendall. She had to be, and that breaks my heart. I'm not saying that any of the the aforementioned girls couldn't have been stars if they weren't born into famous families. Although I don't think that Hailey Bieber is a model. I don't think that Gigi is a model. I think Bella is a model. I think that these girls, I think that Gigi could have been a catalog model. I don't think she would have gotten to the level where she was like a supermodel if she hadn't had, and a lot of people throw dirt on Kendall in that same way. So, I mean, you know, we could talk about whether it is or it isn't, they are or they aren't, blah, blah, blah. But that's where we are. And that's where we are in this moment in time, right? That's where we are in what celebrity has devolved into. It's devolved into this idea that in my opinion, celebrity has lost its specialness, and that seeped into fashion. And I think it's seeped in a wrong way, on a lot of levels.
That is something that I wanted to ask you that we didn't actually, of all the 3 hours of talking last time, we didn't touch on this. How did Iman actually get involved in the project?
Ooh, that's super interesting. So, oh my goodness, that's super interesting. So I went around and approached a bunch of different production companies because we wanted to partner with the production company instead of going straight to the network. Now, there's pros and cons of both things, because sometimes you'll go to a network and the network has a production company that they work with all the time, and they go, oh, well, we're just going to use this production company we've worked with before. We know how they work. I thought it was really important to approach a production company that understood fashion, that was diverse in its makeup. Did I find that with the production company I went with? No. They were somewhat diverse. But once we signed that part of the deal, then it was like, okay, we need a figurehead. And there were only, let's say, 3 or 4 people that that a lay person could name, right? Off the top of their head, if you asked a random white male who's a Black female model, they would probably all know Tyra. They would probably all know Naomi. And then it gets dicey from there. Then it might, then it becomes maybe Iman, but I don't think people of a younger age know who Iman is, unless they know fashion, right? And to me, that's actually heartbreaking, because you can name 30 top white models, hundreds of white top models, but you get into this area of Tyra, Naomi, Iman, and then maybe you extend it, and we're just talking about what the commoner knows about fashion. Maybe you can extend it to Beverly Johnson, but again, that is people of a certain age. Let's say that that's maybe people that are over 40. Maybe people under 40 have no idea who Iman is and have no idea who Beverly Johnson is, because their heyday ended at the end of the 80s. But Iman was on that list. We knew we didn't want Naomi. We knew we didn't want Tyra, because both of them were experiencing a backlash at the time. Because this was also right after the Me Too movement, and we're talking about the reckoning, and we're talking about how people are being called out across the board, not just because of their own actions, but because of people that they're associated with, right? And Tyra was America's next top model. Naomi was her behavior throughout the late 80s and the early 90s. And so we didn't want to attach, we wanted to interview them, but we didn't want to attach them to that project, because their baggage becomes our baggage. So then it really was, well, who else is there? And the only person was Iman. And that production company had done the original Project Runway, the golden era Project Runway, when it was on Bravo. And they knew Iman, so they reached out to Iman. And then that's where I sort of come in, because Iman knew about the book. And Iman had done a really beautiful Instagram post about Supreme Models, the book. And she had reached out to me and said, this book is really beautiful, because she tagged me in it, blah, blah, blah. And she followed me, and then I followed her, and then it was this thing. And then I was like, thank you so much. But what was so interesting about this was it's a weird vindication, because I had tried 100 different ways to interview Iman for the book. And her team kept saying, no, she's unavailable. So it's so funny that she wouldn't do an interview for the book Supreme Models, but she ended up the executive producer of the documentary. And since I'm that bitch, I had to ask her one day, you wouldn't do an interview for my book, but here you are sitting doing my documentary. And she clapped back, being that icon that she is. She was like, no one ever told me about your book.
I was about to say, is the message even got to her?
And it didn't. I have all these receipts of how many different times and how many different ways I went out to people that represented Iman. But at the time, they saw no value in a Black project. So they didn't tell her about the book.
And that is just so crazy that you just represent Iman and not see value in a Black project.
That though, right? Because if they had told her about the book, because by that time, I had interviewed several really wonderful Black stars. And even further, I had gotten photo approval from a plethora of Black top models. Everyone from Veronica Webb to Alec Weck to Leah Kabidi to Jordan Dunn, everybody was in the book. Pat Cleveland, it was crazy, right? Had all said yes to being in the book. And so when I was sending those pitches out to her team, I was listing Joan Smalls, this person, that person from every era. But that white agent did not see the value in this Black book. And it still happens to this day. I deal with these people on a regular basis. It was incredibly hard to get Black talent to sign off to do Supreme Sirens after the success of Supreme Models, after the success of Supreme Actresses, after the success of the Supreme Models documentary co-produced by American Vogue. My CV is flawless in that way. My books are bestsellers. And I could not get Black female singers to sign off because I could not get past the gatekeepers. So often I had to find ways around their gatekeepers, who are usually white people who don't see the value of a Black project. And that's on them, but that's also on the talent. Karen Alexander said something to me during her interview for Supreme Models, the book. She said that it was just as important for her to do Essence as it was for her to do Vogue. And she instructed her team that if Essence ever comes looking for her, that they are to give them access to her.
Wow.
Because that magazine was the conduit to Black people. I just fired my literary agent. What I've learned after being in the business since 1995, when I was a model, represented by Ford, Goodfellas, Beatrice and Milan, Elite, all these agencies all over the world, is what talent sometimes forget is that the agent works for you. It's not the other way around. So you are responsible for telling the agent how you want to be represented, who you want to work for, who you don't want to work for, who, when they contact you. And as Black talent and as Black people, we have to take the lead on that. I was very good friends with Marielle Bobo, who was the editor-in-chief at Ebony. She just exited maybe a year and a half ago. And she would tell me stories about, this is Ebony magazine. This is an iconic Black magazine, iconic to Black people in America and maybe across the world. And she was telling me how hard it was to get A-list models to appear in the magazine and get A-list actors to appear on the cover of the magazine. In 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024, Black products are still thought as less than white products. That's on us as Black people. Good morning.
Good morning. I think it's the evening for me, so I can handle it. I've been up for a while. That first line that you said about Karen Alexander was in the documentary about essence is just as important as Vogue. And I'm glad you brought that up because I found Karen Alexander's appearance in that episode so emotional. I think she was one of the most candid and human models that you featured. And I think we mentioned this last time. I'm trying not to repeat ourselves, but I always think that she is so overlooked, especially in terms of looking back at like the successful, incredible Black models. She's one of my favorite faces from her era. So I was excited just to see her in there, but when she was crying, I was like, I'm not really a crier, but I wanted to cry with her. And what she said about Essence and Vogue was really poignant. And I think for a lot of up and coming or already arrived at newer models, that's something they should take in their back pocket because I think, as you said, putting back into our own projects and stuff is so important.
I was there with Karen the day that she shot, and I was watching on the camera, and I have my headphones on. And I'm very, very protective of Karen. And literally, when Karen started crying, I'm like, you know, I've got on my big earphones and I'm watching the monitor and I'm with the other executive producers and I'm watching the team. When Karen started crying, the whole team was crying.
I believe that.
And most of our team was female. The grips, the cinematographers, the camera women were female. It was like me and the showrunner were the males on the set. Everybody else is crying. Everybody else is a female, excuse me. And everyone across the room is crying because her story is so impactful and the gratitude that she exuded while telling her story was so beautiful and impactful. Mm. And she was one of the people that really understood that what we were doing was historic and monumental and important. And it was the first. Mm. You know, not to trash anybody else's documentaries, because there are some beautiful documentaries out there, but if you're only telling the story about yourself, the story of the Black model is incomplete. What we tried to do with Supreme Models was tell the story of the Black models from the beginning of time, from Ophelia DeVore to Awang Chol, to Mona Tugard, to Delone, from God, I'm drawing a blank, Helen Williams, the first Black models to break through, to the girls that are breaking through right now. That's how we tried to tell the story of Supreme Models. So I think that that documentary in its expansiveness is so important. Mm. Why you were so impacted by seeing Karen Alexander is because we see the same Black models over and over. It back to me saying that thing about there were only 3 or 4 models that could have been the executive producer that had the clout to get this documentary greenlit, right? Mm. And that's a shame, because I am personally tired of seeing Naomi Campbell in every show still. I want to see Karen Alexander back on the runway. I want to see Veronica Webb back on the runway. I want to see Loy Samuels back on the runway. I want to see Deborah Shaw back on the runway. I want to see Leah Kabidi back on the runway. There were a million beautiful showgirls that were at the top of their game that still exist, that are still alive. the only Black supermodel was not Naomi Campbell. And I want somebody to dig those girls up in the same way that they'll dig up Claudia Schiffer or Kate Moss or Ava Herzegovina.
Mm-hmm. There's no reason those women that you just listed shouldn't be household names that everybody knows, in fashion or not. Like,
Period, full stop.
How many covers and catwalks has Veronica Webb been on? Come on now. Like
I mean,
Deborah Shaw started to walk again, which is good. She was in a show. My friend actually was doing backstage photography and got to take pictures of her. And I was like, sure.
Extraordinary. I mean, I was so happy to see Alec Weck doing Roberta Cavalli.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I was like,
but even that show, because I loved that show, but I was like, okay, there's not quite enough Black models from that time on this catwalk right now. Because, you know, that was like, I was there, I was watching the video, I was enjoying it, but I was like, okay, come on, and the rest, and then the show ended. And I was like, okay, so that's that. So I'm right there.
It's very funny because it's like, I was happy to see Joan Smalls. I was happy to see Alec. So we had two. And it feels like talking about fashion in the late 90s to into the 2010s again. Oh, there were two.
Yeah, and did you see Joan Smalls' post the other day on Instagram?
I very much did.
We're very back in the same era. You know, we could have been in the time machine. Two girls on the Cavalli catwalk and a post about racism.
Yes.
IMG
yes.
with senior management.
Yes.
Senior manager.
You have to laugh or you'll cry. You have to laugh or you'll scream.
Yeah, really. You mentioned, I don't know how many questions ago, but you mentioned that even after the success of Supreme Models, it was still hard to get names for Supreme Sirens and Supreme Actresses. I wanted to ask you, because obviously we're here having our little celebration for the 2 years anniversary of the docuseries and the 5 years anniversary of the book. So Supreme Models would have been out for 3 years when the documentary came out. Did you see a pickup in traction of the book after the documentary came out? And do you think if there was the kind of backing for the other books that there were from Vogue for Supreme Models, those books would be even bigger?
So Supreme Models is definitely the biggest of the three books. It remains the bestseller of the three books. And I was very lucky with Supreme Models because it was like lightning in a bottle. It came out in fall of 2019. We were talking about the Me Too movement. We were beginning to talk about diversity, equity, inclusion in a much more expansive way. And people were beginning to listen, right? And then it came, so it did very well in pre-sale. Then it did extremely well when it came out because it was the book that all the fashion magazines could actually embrace, because they could say, look, we're talking about a Black book. So we're being, we're adding to the conversation around diversity and inclusion. You know what I mean? And so all the Vogues talked about Supreme Models, and Harper's Bazaar talked about Supreme Models, and everybody talked about Supreme Models, the book. Everybody got on the bandwagon. What was super important with Supreme Models, the book, was that the models got on the bandwagon. They were so happy that finally somebody was shining the light on all of them, not just Iman, Tyra, Naomi, but Lana Ogilvy, like all the girls that are included inside the pages of Supreme Models. That, it became this like part of the conversation, right? In a really beautiful, organic way. Then when the documentary came out, there was a spike in sales again. What Supreme Actresses and Supreme Sirens didn't get is they didn't get the support of the people inside the books in the same way that Models supported Supreme Models. And so I don't know if that's going to change when I do documentary adaptations of the other two books.
You managed to get Vogue on board, which obviously is such like a respected name in fashion. And would it take like such a respected name in music or respected name in film to kind of like really push them to a new audience? But I guess your documentaries are good enough that if all the people inside the book were in the documentary, it will just explode. So I'm glad that you're doing more
I
documentary.
mean, we interviewed so many people for Supreme Models. We interviewed over 50 people for 6 episodes, and the episodes are 24 minutes each. There's so much footage there that didn't make the cut, and because we couldn't, include it all. There are a few people that were interviewed that didn't make it into the documentary, and there are a few people that did make it into the documentary that I don't believe deserve to be in the documentary, and that's where politics come in. There are things that I am going to fix when I do Supreme Models version 2. Supreme Models was definitely a learning experience. Right. And I definitely think that it deserves either a second season or it deserves a reboot.
I want a second season so badly. I know I'm not alone in this.
I think we could do a second season. I think that we there was so much that we tried to pack into these 6 episodes that, I think that ask me which episode I'm least happy with.
Which episode are you least happy with?
I do not like the way that we handled Victoria's Secret and Sports Illustrated.
Right, okay. Why?
Because we exalted them in a way that they didn't deserve to be exalted. Or if we're going to exalt them, then we also need to talk about the other side of exaltation, right? What we know about Sports Illustrated is Sports Illustrated started, was published for the first time in 1964. The first Black woman appeared in the pages of Sports Illustrated in 1984. It took them 20 years to put a Black woman in Sports Illustrated. Are you kidding me? That's a worse track record than Vogue or Harper's Bazaar.
Yeah.
And then let's talk about how Sports Illustrated, being in Sports Illustrated would make a white model a superstar. Cheryl Tiegs, Jill, who's Kathy Ireland, all these mediocre white models that weren't fashion girls would find themselves inside Sports Illustrated, and they would become superstars because then they became part of popular culture. Mm-hmm. But it did very little for the Black model when she was in there, because the Black girl would get 1, maybe 2 photos. And of those photos, they were group photos. They didn't get the same bump. And that was because of how Sports Illustrated treated those Black models. They would bring the white model on The Tonight Show or David Letterman, but they weren't exalting the Black girls in the same way until Tyra. Rashumba has really wonderful memories of doing Sports Illustrated because it was very important to her, and it changed her career and made her a household name. And I can't take that away from her. But ask 10 Black girls that appeared in Sports Illustrated what it did for them. And 1 out of those 10 girls is going to be like, oh, it made me a star. Oh, it gave me a career bump. All it did for the Black model was actually get her a better agency.
Right.
She jumped from a small agency to Ford, or she jumped from a small agency to ING. And we know how bad it was to work for Victoria's Secret because there's a documentary about working for Victoria's Secret.
Yeah.
We know how bad it was to work for Victoria's Secret because Monica Mitro and Ed Razek and so many people were fired from that company.
Right.
So I really wanted to talk about what it's like to be a Black girl, to go to a Victoria's Secret fitting when you're a size 2 and still be told that your hips and your butt are too big because genetically you have a round butt, a beautiful butt that most of the women in the world are like trying to fake get with their BBLs.
Like literally dying.
I want to talk about what it's like to starve yourself to do Victoria's Secret. as a Black woman and still be told you're not good enough. I want to talk about what it's like to be doing Sports Illustrated and do Victoria's Secret and them not have Black hair and makeup artists. You know that the first time that Tyra Banks did Victoria's Secret, she was sent home because the hair and makeup team couldn't do her hair because, of course, they had a white person there that couldn't do Black hair and makeup.
Well, never heard that story, but I believe it.
If you look at the very first time Tyra appears in Sports Illustrated, she ain't got hair and makeup on. That wig is sitting so high up on her head, it looks like she sat it there herself. Oh, she's hot. She's hot at 8 a.m.
What happened today? Let it out, Marcellas.
Those are the stories, though.
No, I know.
I want to talk about the high. I want to talk about the high, and I want to talk about the low. I want to talk about Cecily Lopez when she walks Victoria's Secret runway, right? Mm-hmm. But I also want to talk about what it took to get there, right?
That's fair. You know? I think it's fair to show all sides. So if you were to do a reboot, that's what you would change, making the story a bit more two-sided.
You know, one of the things that we didn't talk about that I really wanted to talk about in Supreme Models, the documentary, was, and it's across the board, but I wanted to talk about it in comparison to Black models getting makeup contracts, mm-hmm. right? And the Black model will be on the set with her white counterpart doing the exact same thing, and she'll be making less than the white female model. And that's across the board. That's catalog, that's editorial, that's makeup contracts. And there were a couple of models who were willing to talk about that. Lana Ogilvie talked about that. She was the first Black model, or one of the first. I think she might have been the first Black model with a CoverGirl contract. Yes, she was. She was there before Tyra. And the contract wasn't as lucrative as her white counterparts, and she knew this. And her agents pushed back on that, and they were like, listen, you're number one on the list, but there is a list. Take it or leave it. And of course, because of exposure, she takes it, right? Do we think that a model like Tamiko Frazier from Maybelline was making the same amount of money as Christy Turlington? No. And that was something I wanted to talk about. I remember when I would be on sets as a model, when I started my career, and we're all, you know, you're sitting there, back then there were vouchers, this is 1995, and you're sitting there and you're filling out your voucher. And you look over and the white boy next to you is getting $2,500 for a day, you're getting paid $1,500 for. And I went to my agent and I said, why is that? We're with the same agency. Mm. And my agent's like, that's how it is. Beth Ann Hardison talks about that in the documentary, right? Well, maybe she didn't talk about that in the documentary, but she talked about it in the book, because she was a booker who represented both Black and white models, and clients would call the agency and book a white model at one rate and book the Black model at a different rate. And she would be like, why? Hmm. And so there's all these things that I wish we had gotten to talk about that we didn't get to talk about. Because again, you can't shove every single injustice into one documentary.
Yeah, it's almost a shame that you need 2 docu-series to cover all the injustices.
It's not just about the injustices, it is also about the triumphs, right?
Yeah.
You know, it is about the first. It is about Tyra Banks being the first Black woman on the cover of Sports Illustrated. It is about Beverly Johnson being the first Black woman on the cover of American Vogue. It's about Donielle Luna being the first Black woman on the cover of British Vogue. It's about the joy and the pain. It's about the pain that gets you to the joy.
Is there any one model that you wish was in the series? Maybe they passed for any reason that you wish you could have spoken to?
I mean, of course, we wanted to interview Naomi, and of course, we wanted to interview Tyra, and we went out to both. See, that's where Iman comes in because she's the queen. Okay, so here's some tea. We went out to both Naomi and Tyra. Iman approached them both directly. And that's where Iman was really efficient. Iman, like I would say, oh, I literally would have a dream list. And I would say, oh, I want to talk to Olivier. And Iman would be like, oh, I'm seeing him tomorrow. I want to talk to Anna. Oh, I call her. I want to talk to Edward. I text him. I want to talk to Zendaya. Oh, she's giving me an award to 2 nights from now. I see her and I'll talk to her. Like that's Iman. That's my bad Iman like accent. But that's how Iman was. Like she's that girl. So she's connected to these people. So she reached out to, I don't know if she texted or called, but I'm assuming she called. And both of them said yes initially. They both had reservations about doing it because they didn't want it to be negative. They didn't want to talk about each other. They didn't want to talk about the feud. And that's not, if you watch the documentary, that's not what the documentary is about. Mm-hmm. We don't talk about, they're not Black models sitting there sniping at each other and talking about that. And we assured both of them that that's not what the documentary was about. Mm-hmm. And both of them unfortunately dropped out after saying yes. Wow. And so people always ask me, where's Naomi? And I always go, where is Naomi? People go, where's Tyra? Where is Tyra? Because there's absolutely no reason that neither one of them shouldn't have done a documentary where Edward in it for Anna Wintour, Olivier, Zendaya, James Scully, Zach Posen, all these luminaries in fashion were telling their stories. You could have given us an hour. But if you ask me who, aside from those two, if you ask me who I really did want to interview, there's a list of people that we tried to interview. Deborah Shaw didn't want to do an interview for whatever reason. Deborah Shaw didn't want to do Supreme Models the book, so it made sense that she wouldn't do Supreme Models the documentary. I desperately wanted to talk to Alec Weck, and we interviewed so many IMG girls. Ivan Bart, dear departed sweet angel Ivan, was so instrumental with getting us IMG girls, past and present. And we kept going out to Alec, and she wouldn't do an interview. I really wanted to interview Chanel Iman, because she's a personal favorite of mine from that period of One Black Girl on the Runway, from the whiteout period, 1998 to 2014. I really wanted to interview Chanel Iman, and it turns out that even though she was with IMG, her individual agent never went out to her and told her about the project. So Chanel went to Cecily and asked Cecily why we didn't ask her to do the documentary, because they're friends. Whoa. And Cecily came and asked me, and I was like, girl, let me pull out the receipts. I got receipts as long as a CVS. You know how you go to the CVS? I don't know what the CVS is in Europe, but you go and you have all the coupons at the end and you have your list. I pulled out a list of receipts. I had emails asking for Chanel Iman, every which way but loose. And so to find out that that her agent never saw the importance of doing this documentary, which left her feeling like she had been left out, breaks my heart.
That's wild.
Buck wild.
That she thought she wasn't even being asked as well. Like, it's Chanel Iman. So it just goes to show the importance of a good agent.
It's Chanel Iman. But then again, it goes right back to the gatekeepers. Every Black girl at IMG is getting asked to do it. Chanel Iman is still with IMG. She might not be working every day because she has kids and she has a husband. And that person doesn't ask Chanel Iman, doesn't tell her about the documentary. I'll go you one further. One of my dearest friends is Delone, who's killing it. And I did not want to, as a friend of someone, I didn't want to be unprofessional and ask them myself, right? I went through their agents. I didn't want to break that fourth wall and make anybody feel uncomfortable. Delone ends up not doing. I went out to Delone's people 100 different ways. I kept going out to Delone's agent, and he kept saying she's not available, she's not available, she's not available. And for some reason, it never occurred to me to just pick up the phone and call her, or pick up the phone and ask her. And she doesn't appear in the documentary. And I actually took it personally, because for me, it was like, oh, well, she doesn't want to be in my documentary. She's in my book, she's in Supreme Models, but she doesn't want to be in the documentary. So when it all came to a head, when Vogue did a party for the last episode of Supreme Models in New York, and all the girls came to the party. And Delone walked up to me and she said, why didn't you ask me to do the documentary? And I swear to you, I almost broke into tears, because I'm a little teary right now, because I consider her a friend. Mm-hmm. And I wanted her to be in the documentary. And I said, Delone, I emailed your agent 100 different times about you being in the documentary, but I didn't want to encroach upon that friendship. You know what I mean? I didn't want to ask something and make it seem like I'm using you, even, because we have a relationship.
Yeah, yeah.
I went through the proper channels, and in that way, it fell through the cracks. Another person that it turned out that I should have asked and I didn't is Cynthia Bailey, and she's a friend. And Cynthia said to me, why didn't you ask me to do the documentary? And it slipped through the cracks, because I wasn't using my own Rolodex. There's an old term for you. I wasn't going through my own personal contact list to get to models directly. I was trying to be somewhat professional. So there's that. Did that answer your question?
It answers my question, of course. I guess next time round, after 5 ignored emails, you just go to the source.
I learned that, and I incorporated that into Supreme Silence. If there was somebody that I wanted and I wasn't getting traction from their agent, or I got a no from their agent, I figured out a way to get to them directly, because I wanted a no directly from them.
Fair enough, because you can't trust these people.
Because you can't trust your agent. You can't trust their agent to see value in a Black project. You can't trust their agent to see value in any project, because they're probably getting inundated with so many offers. So let's take the Black thing out of it, and let's just say, best case scenario, so-and-so is getting inundated with so many different offers that they can't give attention to each offer. So they have to sort of edit through them.
And who are your favorite Black designers right now?
I love Diotima, Rachel Scott. I love the crochet thing she does. I think is just wonderful. I love that those things are made in Jamaica. I'm a little bit obsessed with Frederick Anderson. I don't know if you know who he is. He's been showing a couple of times at Buick Fashion Week, and for me, he's even though his clothes are super modern and very beautiful, as a designer, he's a throwback to the good old days of like Willie Smith and Patrick Kelly and Byron Lars. When you see this like Black designer come running out at the end of the show, and he's smiling and he's happy, and the Black girls are surrounding him and they're showing him love. You know what I mean? Like when I see him at the end of the shows, I'm like, yes. There's a jewelry designer. His name is Jamil, and his brand is called Kyrie. Okay. And I'm obsessed with him. I actually know him in passing. He's a Shop McMullen, the beautiful store in Oakland and now in San Francisco, carries him. And I've met him a couple of times, and he does jewelry, but he also does like pottery, and every now and then he'll unleash like clothes, and his jewelry is just unbelievably beautiful and chic and like cool, and like the things that come out of his head, it's like otherworldly. You know, it's like, who are you inspired by? The movie Alien? You know what I mean? It's like that these things are like, you know, these pieces are just glorious. So I love Jamil's brand. It's called Kiri. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. It's Khiry. I love him. So Diotima, Frederick Anderson, Kiri, and of course, I love my Sergio Hudson. I worship at the throne of Sergio Hudson. Did you see Beyonce and Sergio Hudson at the Glamour Women of the Year Awards?
I did. I like Sergio Hudson too.
A moment.
There are so many great Black brands at the moment, so I'm really hoping that this Met Gala is dressed appropriately, because there's no shortage of incredible Black designers.
Listen, I'm trying desperately to go to this Met Gala. Like, I've been, the moment they announced the theme, I got on the phone and I was like, I want to go to the Met Gala. I want to go to the Met Gala. I want to go to the Met Gala. I really want to go. Of course, you have to be invited. Of course, it's really expensive. I can't afford to pay for the ticket. So you have to get the invite, then pay for the ticket. But usually brands or networks have tables, and you're invited by the brand or to sit at the table. So that's what girl, I'm calling in all these chits. I'm like, I need to be there, and I know, you know, I want to wear something fantastic.
I would like to see you doing the red carpet for the Met Gala this time. That would be great. Try and pull some strings there. You know the right people, I'm sure, from your documentary.
Let's talk about that, because I would be amazing.
You would be amazing. That's what I would like to see. That could be your in. Obviously, we're celebrating Supreme Models today. If you could pick one favorite memory from that experience, what would it be? To end on a high.
One?
Just one.
Oh my God, one. From the making of Supreme Models.
Yeah, just
the documentary.
It wasn't in my email, but it just came to me.
I have it.
Okay.
The last scene of the last episode is all the girls when they finish their interview and the joy that they feel when they finish their interview. And I swear to you, I can do, when I hear the music cue and they start talking about, we're kind of wrapping it up, and then we wrap it up, and then there's like outtakes, but it's like boom, 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 boom. And Jordana does this when she's finished, and Michaeline Thomas, the actress, goes, "Wow, that was impactful." And Precious Lee does something really cute, and Ebony Riley goes like this, and she goes, "Thank you," and Garrett's like, and Beth Ann does her little thing. But the thing that I love the most is the very last person is Iman, and she's such a big person. She's such a big part of it. And she goes, "And I'm out." And I just love that, because Iman was the second to last interview. I was the last interview. Iman was the second to last. So when she goes, when all the girls are so happy that they did this monumental thing, and they're a part of this big, beautiful thing that's so much beautiful, so much bigger than all of them, and so big because of all of them. And they all have smiles, and they all have tears. And then when Iman goes, "And I'm out," and does the salute, I'm like, I just, yes.
The pure joy of the season. I feel like for your Halloween costume, you need to dress as all of them and recreate the montage.
Yes.
Just performed as a one-man show by Marcellas.
I mean, literally, when I'm watching the end of the video, I do like everything. I know every single beat.
Well, Thank you for coming on again and telling us all your amazing fashion and model stories. You know that I cannot get enough of them. And let's all hope for the reboot.
Oh, but remember that Supreme Models, the documentary, moves to Netflix starting January 1st.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
Well, I would have asked you about it if I didn't know.
And I'm out.
I can still see you in the mirror. Wait, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yes.
Something in the intro. That's incredible. That is incredible.
Yes.
Because now millions more people are going to see this. Like,
millions of people are going to see it, and the book will start to sell again, and maybe we'll get season 2.
So then maybe season 2 will be a Netflix original.
Exactly.
I feel like you know something I don't know, but I'm hoping that that's going to be the case, and I cannot wait. Everyone just make sure that you watch it on Netflix so that the ratings can't be denied, and there's no way we can't get season 2. And 3 and 4 and 5 and 6.
And 3 and 4 and 5 and 6.
And on that note, have a fabulous day, Marcellas.
Love you, sweetheart.
See you soon. Bye.
Bye.